Dear students, in the first session, we took the first half of the first chapter of history, that is, how, when and where, from class 8th. And today we are going to carry forward this chapter and we'll finish it too. So the chapter, as you all know, is how, when and where. The subtopics which will be covered today are: the first one, administration produces records. The second topic is surveys became important. And the third topic is what the unofficial records tell us. And the targeted learning objectives will be to make you understand about the sources, throwing light on 250 years of British period, to make you know the difference between official records and the unofficial records, to enable you to understand the importance of surveys for the British. And students, before we start our session today and go on with the subtopics, let us recapitulate what we had learned in the first session. Recapitulation is going in bit detail to make you recall every bit we learned in the last session. So here we go with our recapitulation. In the last session we learned, first, history is not just about memorizing dates, it is about finding out how things were in the past and how things have changed. As soon as we compare the past with the present, we refer to time, we talk of before and after. And students, second thing we learnt in the last session was, there is no precise dates for all events. Many of the events that happened in the past can't be precisely dated, as they have happened in due course of time. Thirdly, we learned this by few examples, if you remember, like people in India did not begin drinking tea one fine day. Similarly, one single date can't be fixed on which British rule was established. Third example you learnt in the last session was, the national movement did not start on a particular day. Similarly, changes did not take place within the economy and society on one specific date. So students, we can't fix one specific date with many of the events. And if we can't fix one date with many of the events, then our history can just be the dates. And the fourth thing we learned was, dear students, dates are not that important in history in today's context. But earlier, dates were important when historians were interested only in the lives of kings. It was the time when they wrote only about the year a king was crowned, the year he married, the year he had a child, the year he fought a particular war, the year he died, and the next year the next ruler succeeded to the throne. And fifth thing we learnt was, historians now write about a host of other issues and other questions as well, like they look at how people earn their livelihood, what they produced and ate, how cities developed and markets came up, how kingdoms were formed and new ideas spread. And historians even write about now how cultures and society changed. Sixth thing we learnt in the last session was, by what criteria we choose a set of dates as important. Students, dates are not important on their own. It is the event which is important. Even makes a particular set of dates as important. If the focus of study changes, a new set of dates will appear significant. Dear students, here I gave you one example, if you remember, that in the histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each Governor General was important. So when history is written by the British historians, then the event they focused are those related with Governor Generals only. So the dates related to them only appear important. And when historian focuses other events of the same period, then some other dates become important. The seventh point we learnt was, James Mill in his book A History of British India divided Indian history into 3 periods. Students, if you remember those periods, we learnt the periods were Hindu, Muslim and British. Okay student, next we learnt was this periodization has its own flaws. Dear students, we can't refer to any period as Hindu, Muslim or British. According to Mill, British rule will end darkness and will bring happiness and progress. British rule will help civilize people of India, and the period before the British was such when the Hindu and Muslim despots ruled the country. Religious intolerance, caste taboos and superstitious practices dominated social life. Dear student, we learned the flaws with this periodization. Before British rule, we had made great achievements in the past and a variety of faiths simultaneously existed. In the past, when we just referred to a period as Hindu and Muslim on the basis of the ruler's religion. Next we learnt was, moving away from the British classification, historians have usually divided Indian history into ancient, medieval and modern. Modern period is associated with science, reason, democracy, liberty and equality. And medieval period was a term used to describe a society where these features of modern society did not exist. This periodization also has some drawbacks, which we learnt in the chapter. As there was absence of equality, freedom or liberty under British rule, nor was the British period one of economic growth. The British period is better referred to as the colonial period rather than modern, when the subjugation of one country by another leads to political, economic, social and cultural changes. We refer to the process as colonization. British gained control over our territory and eventually started controlling the lives of our people and brought in changes in every sphere, be it social, political, cultural or economic. This is colonization. So student, this all we learnt in the last session. Now we are going ahead in the chapter. Let's see what is there to learn. We had a great deal of information about the British period. Student, any idea how we come to know so much about this period in such great details? What could be the sources throwing light on this period and revealing it crystal clear to us? Let's learn about the same. So, the first topic we are taking today, sources throwing light on 250 years of colonial past. So, first we have the official records of the British administration. The British believed in the act of writing so that later they can be studied again and if required and can be debated also. So, the British started writing down every instructions, action, plan, policy decision, agreement, investigations. This conviction produces an administrative culture of memos, notings and reports. Students, the British not only wrote down everything they did, but even created spaces for preserving their written documents. And now herewith came in the culture of having record rooms with every administrative institutions. Record rooms, the village tehsildar's office, the collectorate, the commissioner office, the provincial secretariat, the law court, all had their record rooms. And apart from this, there were specialized institutions like archives and museums were also established to preserve important records. Okay students, this is the picture of the National Archives of India that came up in 1920s to preserve British documents, producing multiple copies. In the early years of the 19th century, these documents not only were preserved, but also were carefully copied out and beautifully written by the calligraphist. This is by those who specialized in the art of beautiful writing. By the middle of 19th century, with the spread of printing, multiple copies of these records were printed within no time. Students, the next we are learning is surveys became important during colonial period, and surveys even provides us a lot of information about this period. Do you know why the surveys were conducted by the British? Let's find out the reason. Apart from the official records, we have another important source throwing light on the colonial period, and that is the surveys which I just told you. The British believe that surveying is very important as that will help understand India in various respects and will subsequently help in administering it effectively. By the early 19th century, detailed surveys were being carried out to map the entire country. Various types of surveys were carried out in colonial period, like the first one, in the villages, revenue surveys were conducted. The effort was to know the topography, the soil quality, the flora, the fauna, the local histories and the cropping pattern. All the facts seen as necessary to know about to administer the region. Second survey. From the end of the 19th century, census operations were held every 10 years. These prepare detailed records of the number of people in all the provinces of India, noting information on caste, religions and occupations. Census basically is the head count, which means the counting of the number of people living in the country and the various other information related to the population. Dear students, there were many other surveys done like A. The botanical surveys. Botanical surveys takes account of the plants and plant species. This survey seeks to collect information related to different plants. And B. The geological surveys, which is a survey about animals. It takes into account information about all domestic and wild animals and different species related to animals. Third is the archaeological surveys, the discovery and recording of archaeological sites. And the next is anthropological surveys, which deals with surveying human evolution. It is the study of human societies, their cultures and their developments. And the next survey was the forest surveys. To know about the immense forest wealth India had, the trees which could be commercially valuable and the various products that can be benefited with. So here can see how the British wanted to know India and the purpose was to exploit India in the best possible way for their greater good and to administer it effectively. The documents produced by the British and the surveys done by them throw light just on what the official thought, what they were interested in and what they wished to preserve for posterity. Posterity means the people who will exist in the future. Students, these records do not always help us understand what other people in the country felt. Students, can you guess about the various sources that can throw light upon the life of other people? Let me tell. For this, we need to go for unofficial records. Though we find them in plenty, yet they are more difficult to get than the official records. So here the unofficial records are, we have diaries of people, accounts of pilgrims and travelers, autobiographies of the important personalities, and popular booklets that were sold in local bazaars, newspapers, written ideas of leaders and reformers, written records of poets and novelists. But now we will learn the limitations of the unofficial records. They were produced by those who were literate. Can we know the lives of the illiterate ones with these records? From these, we will not be able to understand how history was experienced and lived by the tribals and the peasants, the workers in the mines or the poor on the streets. Getting to know their lives is a more difficult task, yet this can be done if you make a little bit of efforts. Dear all, that was all in this chapter to learn. Hope you all have understood everything well. Let us recapitulate what we learned in the chapter. Firstly, we learnt was about the sources throwing light on 250 years of British period in India. Secondly, we learnt about why British started taking keen interest in writing official documents. Thirdly, they did so to study them and can debate on them when required. Fourth, we learnt was not only did they write every action, policy, instructions, etc., but also started preserving them, for which they made record room attached with every important office or institutions. Fifth point we learnt was They even started producing multiple copies, earlier with the help of calligraphists and later by the printing machines. And the sixth point we learnt was the British even did elaborate surveys like revenue, census, botanical, geological, forest, etc. to administer country effectively and use it to its own benefit to the optimum. And the seventh thing we learnt was the official records not only tell about the British action in India, eighth is to know history of Indians, we need to go with the unofficial sources like diaries, accounts of pilgrims and travelers, autobiographies of important personality, etc. And the next thing we learnt was, but such records doesn't tell us about the life of the tribals and the peasants, the workers in the mines or the poor on the streets. And the last thing we learnt was, to know their life, some other sources need to be find out. Okay, so students, we have two worksheets today to just know how much we have learnt, and this is worksheet 1. So there is a picture in front of you and you have to answer the following question. What does the building describe? So if you can know the answer from what we have learned today, I can even give you the answer of the same. This building is the National Archive of India, and the second question is, when was the building made? This building was made in the year 1920. Why was it built? Students, try to answer this question as well. This was built to preserve the British documents. So, the next question we have is, name two important sources of writing colonial history of India. Again, you even try to answer and let me even give you the answer. And the answer is, the two sources are the official records and the surveys. The next question we have is, why did the British preserve official documents? And this question is very important. As you have learned, the answer is, the British believed in the act of writing. Every action, plan, policy, decision, etc. began to be written up so that later they can be studied again if required and can be debated also. For this, they made record rooms attached to every institution. The next question we have is, name the different kind of surveys done in the colonial period, and this is quite easy to answer. We had the different kind of surveys as the revenue surveys, census, botanical surveys, geological surveys, archaeological surveys, anthropological surveys and forest surveys. So, this is the end of your first worksheet. Let's move on to worksheet 2, and this is the fill in the blanks. The first one is, British were very particular about preserving dash documents. This you need to answer by yourself. The second one is, census operations are held every dash years. The third one is, the colonial government gave much importance to the practice of dash for effective administration. And the fourth one is, the British established specialized institutions like dash and dash to preserve important documents. So that's all for today, students. Hope you have learnt every detail properly and you were listening everything patiently. Thank you and have a nice day.